Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us in our Steps Travel in Conversation with. And tonight I'm delighted to have with us, thrilled to have Tim with us, Tim Butcher. Tim, thank you very much for joining us. Tim,
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks.
you are hugely talented. You wear many different hats. You're a journalist, a former correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, a broadcaster. You host podcasts, lecture at universities, tour lead, and also best-selling author, of course, with Blood River and Chasing the Devil. I've always been fascinated by your curiosity. What drives that curiosity?
Well, I suppose it's a sense of, what's over the horizon. And let me be honest, that means I'm kind of not happy with the horizon, the things that are within my horizon. A slight sort of itch in my pants. I thought about this before we had this conversation, and I think as a child, the thing I asked for most at Christmas time, at birthday time, was always predicated on buggering off with a tent, a knife, a gas lamp to, a gas cooker to cook with, a map, an atlas, a compass, even at an incredibly early age. And I come from the UK, come from the Midlands, come from Northamptonshire. There's nothing wrong with Northamptonshire, the rose of the shires, as their local authority likes to paint. But it did make me laugh recently when I read that the great Paddy Lee Fermer, who some of your listeners will be familiar with, a great 20th century figure, Second World War hero and traveller, who famously walked down the Rhine and the Danube. And I've always had him on a sort of mega pedestal. And where did he have his childhood? In the First World War, he was in Northamptonshire, a little village called Dodford, which is about 5 miles from where I am. So maybe there's a thing about muddy lanes of Northants that you really want to kind of, the best view of them is over your right shoulder leaving. I don't wish to be disparaging. In essence, it's because I'm curious about what's over the horizon. I want to learn. I have this insatiable nosiness, and that's what brought me into journalism, wanting to find things out. And it led into a career as a foreign correspondent, and then into places which were quite difficult as a war correspondent. But then that became even more tantalizing, because you're only just doing the surface when you're a war correspondent. You really are just doing the smash, the crash, the bang, the flame. What about the tinder? Why is it flammable? What's so difficult about the Balkans in the 1990s, or the Middle East forever, or South Asia after 9/11? What are the conditions there? And I suppose it's an insatiable curiosity that has driven me.
And then how does that affect your travels, or how do you decide where to go on your different travels, or it depend whether you're a journalist, you get an assignment, or whether you're writing for a book or a project in different ways? What inspires
Well, I
that?
think let me, the cards on the table. I was 20 years a foreign correspondent, and I kept going to places, and they weren't quite, I was hugely, enriching experience, but sometimes you just don't quite get it, don't quite get to the bottom. And there are a couple that just lodged in my mind. And the Congo is frankly the big one. It's
Yeah.
literally the kind of, the Mount Everest for travel experiences. It is so colossal and so tricky and so magnificently rich and challenging through history, through actuality, what's going on today, through what might be happening in the future with the world worrying about minerals for their batteries and electric cars, which guess what? They all come from the Congo. That I got drawn to it. And we all know the Congo. It's kind of those two resonant syllables. Congo is almost in our minds. But what is it? Is it a place? Is it just a river? Or how does the river segue? Why are there multiple countries called the Congo? So I came at it as someone who was sensitive that so many African stories had their roots in the Congo, but also aware that it was difficult, really difficult. And in that case, journalistic, I went there. I remember after there was a nasty incident where the dictator, wasn't an elected leader, a man called Laurent Kabila, was assassinated, and I dropped in as a journalist into Kinshasa, into the capital city, and I have never been so journalistically overwhelmed. We didn't have a shot. We couldn't get our heads around this huge country, this huge place with all the baggage of Zaire and Mobutu and Leopold, and all of those things. They were alluded to, referenced to, but really, come on, we were just chasing our tails. And so that it was at that moment when I was so defeated journalistically, I thought, I've got to come back here, and I had to wait my time. And then, as so often in life, when you tune your ear to something, you suddenly pick it up. You hear it being referenced. My mother, I didn't even know this. My mother had traveled through the Congo in the 1950s, late 50s. And she had not really talked about it because she'd been on an African journey. I knew she'd had a great time in Rhodesia, as was, Zimbabwe, as is, and in Kenya and in Nairobi. But I had no idea that she joined the dots in the 1950s by going along a river through the Congo and a train and a ferry and a boat and a this and the other. And so you pick that up. And then for me, the most extraordinary thing was working for the Daily Telegraph as a foreign correspondent. Again, this is not something that it's referenced or even alluded to in any way, but the most important person who has ever worked at the Daily Telegraph, the paper's been around for almost 2 centuries, was Henry Morton Stanley, a foreign correspondent. And he was important because he went to Africa. Okay, what did he do in Africa? Oh, well, hold on, didn't he do the old Livingston, Dr. Livingston, I presume, thing? Oh, yeah, he did that. And that's interesting and impressive in its own right, but not nearly as impressive as what he then went on to do. Because he came back to London with that Livingston story, and all the snobs in London said, oh, what do you do? Oh, you're not a real explorer, you're not one of us, you're a working class bloke from Wales, you've even changed your name, you're even half American, you're not one of us. Literally, the Spectator was rude about him. So he said, okay, how can I convince you? And they said, well, there's only one massive geographical unknown, which is, where does the Congo River come from? Because they know where that it mouths into the Atlantic, but whence it comes from, no one knew. And he went back and cracked that. It took him 3 years, and he did that as a journalistic stunt. And that then planted a great seed. I could go back to the foundational journey of a Daily Telegraph guy, follow that journey, but it wouldn't just be a journalistic exercise. It would be one of unraveling history, of touching on my own, challenging your own person, because it's going to be like the toughest thing I've ever done. Forget Bosnia, forget Sarajevo, forget Kosovo, forget it being embedded, going into Sierra Leone, forget Charles Taylor in Liberia and child soldiers. This is really big. And so it kind of came in that route. Very long answer, but the crucial thing is that the Congo, place, geography, history, stands as the original sin of modern colonial Africa. It's the foundation. It's the wellspring from which everything else flows. Apartheid, white supremacy, French conflicts in West Africa, clashes with Gordon of Khartoum, into modernity, Rwandan genocide. Where do they hide? They're in the Congo. So the Congo is at the epicenter. And so I got drawn to it through almost a morbid curiosity and a challenge.
And so Stanley's journey was the thread which you could try and tell the wider story of the Congo itself. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And let's remember.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yes.
No, I was going to say, you followed your journey was what, 2,500 miles. It was by sort of on foot, motorbike, boat, dugout, canoe, and you mentioned it, or you used the word toughest earlier on as one of the toughest assignments, but there must have been some very difficult moments for you on that journey.
Well, yeah, I said somewhere in the book I referred to it as I'd found a sort of unique form of travel. I called it travel by ordeal, because everything was difficult. I mean, not just having guys with guns, threatening you, or getting chased around, being accused of being a spy, or being detained for a few days or overnight or whatever, because that's kind of okay. The really ordeal thing was that this vast space, this magnificent, huge area, 2,500 miles, as you say, from one side to the other, to get from one side of the Congo, this single country. Let's pause, go into brackets. There are two Congos. There's a very big one and a big one which isn't quite as big. The French one, French is called Congo Brazzaville. The big one is Congo Kinshasa. Today's entitled the Democratic Republic of Congo. People might remember Zaire. People might remember the Congo Free State. People might remember the Belgian Congo. The point is, it's enormous. One country, from one side to the other side, is London to Moscow. So imagine being challenged, right? Go from London to Moscow. You've got to go that journey, and there are no roads. There used to be roads, but they've all gone. What about railways? Used to be railways. They've all gone. There used to be ferries. My mother, she took one. They've all gone. So how are you going to do it? And that's why it became such a an extraordinary experience because in travel writing, why do you think that travel writing can help? There was a time when travel writers wrote because people had no idea what it was to gaze upon the Egyptian pyramids, to walk across a desert, to climb a mountain, to travel an ocean, to go to the poles. It was inconceivable. So travel writing illuminated and told people what the experience was like. My type of travel writing isn't that. It's not to say, oh, this is what it is. I'm there to try and make it, I hope, slightly richer. Because you mentioned that the journey of Stanley was the narrative arc and it was the storyline. But it allows you to peel. It allows you to peel most extraordinary layers and learn about the layer upon layer of history that happened in this place. And I'm not talking just about human history. I'm talking about, the conservation, environment, the extraordinary pressure cooker of the rainforest, the amazing zoonosis that takes place. We all know that word zoonosis because of COVID a few years ago, right? Yeah. Well, guess where on the planet has most zoonosis happens, which is when pathogens jump from animals to humans. That'll be guess where? Oh, you got it, in the Congo. And what examples might there be? HIV is a good one. That jump from SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus, to humans because of animals being eaten for bushmeat. What about Ebola? People have heard of Ebola. There is, to be nice and relevant, in a part of the DRC Congo, there is an Ebola outbreak at the moment. So it's such a rich place. The journey allowed me to explore so many different layers. And yes, there was a certain degree of ordeal and a certain degree of terror and fear, but also extraordinary beauty.
So given you've been there before and your journalistic experiences at Kabila's assassination, etc., were you better prepared, do you think, or were you just perhaps more aware of what might go wrong and how to handle such situations?
I think as a war correspondent who'd been to difficult places and had people sort of be, in extreme times, I had a certain degree of self-preservation, a capacity for self-preservation. I'm massively cowardly. If the guns are going off, I'm the first to be hiding under the bed. I let the brave cameraman go out and film that. But I'd also, when's the best time to cross the front line? Answer 3 o'clock in the morning because everyone's asleep or pissed or both. And so you work these things out. But the very special thing about traveling in the Congo for that particular trip was that no one else would conceive of doing it. It was like a sort of a private little Mount Everest. I was going to break away from the herd. All the journalists I was with, they all went to the same places. We traipsed through the 1990s, Gulf War I, Gulf War II, into the Balkans, one after the other, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Kosovo, one after the other. And you saw the same faces, but it was the same group of people. You say Congo to people, no, it's just too daunting. And let's remember, as I say, the richness of the history, this foundational capacity the Congo has. In the 1960s, all the journalists you've ever heard of went to the Congo. It was new. The country had independence on the 30th of June. There was chaos afterwards. It was very telegenic. You got to go to a city called Elizabethville, now Lubumbashi. It was arguably the best city in Africa. I mean, incredible wealth had come there with the mining industry and so wonderful restaurants. And you had exotic, Michael Parkinson, the British journalist, the TV journalist, he goes to the Congo, famously hides in a bath in Lubumbashi when the bullets are going off. Everyone, when they're Graham Greene goes to write novels and indeed fall in love in the Congo, because that's what another elemental human capacity. You do things like fall in love there. But the thing about the journalistic trade, I know, and your listeners would have a sense, is it's like a circus. The circus puts up its big tent when there's an event, and then the tent is moved. We go on to the next event. The Congo in the 60s, the tent went there. And then there was fatigue. And then there was Mobutu. And then people moved on. And it kind of flickered back in 1974 when the rumble in the jungle happened. And then Mobutu dies in 97. And then there's the Rwandan genocide. But it was just that sense of news editors having a degree of fatigue. So they wouldn't. So again, another long answer. I went because it was the greatest professional working challenge that I could conceive of.
And having been there, having done the journey itself, I think the subtitle of the book is Africa's Broken Heart. And perhaps all too much, maybe media portrays the Congo through humanitarian crisis, through war, through corruption. But you came across a very different side of the Congo, not least through the people, and you write wonderfully about the people there, their friendliness, their empathy in lots of different ways.
Absolutely. I use the word magnificent. It is almost overwhelmingly so, physically, in terms of geography, in terms of the river, in terms of the climate, in terms of the soils, what grows there, in terms of the flora and fauna, and of course, in terms of the people. I learned a lesson, again, there's a reference somewhere in the book, where I learned that cities bad, bush, jungle good. And it's like a reversal of what we read in our sort of medieval history of, we all hide in walled towns with castles, and because outside there be dragons. The reverse is true. The dragons are in the towns because that's where the venality is. And it's always the same problem in Africa. It's only a few. It's only a few leaders, local police, local hoodlums, local mafia heads. They're the ones who ruin it for everybody else. Because when you're out in the bush, when you're out in villages, I was meeting incredible people with great vision, great wisdom, great tolerance, great survivability. They're surviving in an environment there was a guy I met pushing a bike, and I reference him, and I think there's a photograph of him in the book as well. It's a guy called Muke Ngoy, and I'm in an area, and this bicycle, it's like, it's a sort of hyper-evolved bicycle. It stopped being a bicycle that you or I would call a bicycle, and it's become a beast of burden, right? It's not for riding on or recreation or anything. This is a beast of burden. He has got palm oil in yellow canisters strapped with ivy either side of the kind of frame, and he's pushing this bicycle. He hasn't got a saddle. He's not going to sit on the damn thing. He's just going to push tens of kilograms of palm oil, because he can take it from where palm oil grows to where salt can be found on the edges of Lake Tanganyika, and he can do a trade. He could do classic arbitrage. He can do, literally, this is the classic microeconomics lesson number one. You take something which is common in an area to a place of scarcity and you make a profit. But the distance he was walking was London to Manchester. Imagine walking on a bicycle, plodding up the M1 and turning left in Coventry on the M6, and every step of the way, it's an ordeal, and there's no tarmac, and the road's gone, and you don't know if the village next door has got rebels in it. They're going to come and slit your throat, and you might make $30. And that was the extraordinary. And he asked me for something. All he asked me for, this gentleman, was information. Are there bad guys down the road where you just came from? So it's an example, and he's just one tiny little blood vessel, one tiny little corpuscle. And I do call the book Blood River, and there's a certain sort of poetic element to that. But if you could imagine, if the river is a blood vessel, an aorta, a great vein of bringing life into Africa, this gentleman represents a single cell. And there are millions and billions like him, millions and millions of people like him. And they just want to get on, and they just want those roads to come back, and they want the chance to do trade, and they want to be able to work. So yeah, meeting people like that has a much stronger impression on me than the guy at the airport who steals my passport and calls me a spy and sticks a gun in my face. And that's the kind of, you can control for that. I find Muke's story much more impressive.
So I'm a big believer in So To Accept Travel, that travel breaks down the stereotypes, the preconceptions we have of different places. And on your travels throughout the Congo, you must have, yes, that one individual, but there must have been other cases where your thought process about the Congo changed, maybe, as you say, from the city to the bush, and the difference between the two.
I remember there was one moment on the river, because I got frustrated, because I went there with my Western European model, which is, there's a river, it's an extraordinary asset, it has to have powered vessels on it. It had them 100 years ago, it had them 70 years ago when Hollywood sent a film crew there to film The African Queen, Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall and Katharine Hepburn and John Huston. It's a great story. They went there in 1951, deep into the Congo, then up the river and then down a side stream to film that beautiful 1951 film that would win Bogart his only Oscar, his Best Actor Oscar. And I went to one section. I'm on the upper river, And to call it a river, that's almost to underplay it, because it is much more than a river. It's a force of nature. We're 2,000 kilometers from the ocean, and it's already 4 kilometers across. And there's a current, and that is a huge volume of water. And my expectation was, my prejudice, I was prejudiced. I went and think, come on, where are the power boats? I've got to be able to find a power boat. There's nothing, I couldn't find anything in my research, but there's got to be someone. I've got the dollars. I'll be able to make a plan. I couldn't find a single powered boat left in the upper Congo. It's about a 700-kilometer stretch above Stanleyville and before the gates of hell, Port d'Enfer, nicely named cataracts. 700K stretch. Nothing, not a single powered boat. And it really, Congolese boat, not a single one. And it really kind of confirmed those negative stereotypes, until I was on the riverbank and I met these guys, and they had all the reason in the world to say, who the hell are you? And I just said, would you take me downstream in one of your pirogues, in one of your carved out tree trunk canoes? And they looked at me and they thought, who is this character? Quite rightly, they thought I was, how dodgy was this person? We discussed a price, we shook on it, and then they did a couple of things which were memorable. They stood up. I was going to take them away from their home for about 10 days, 2 weeks. They're going to go downstream, which would have been relatively okay for 2 or 3 days, and then it would take them 2 or 3 weeks to flail back up. Really difficult. And they stood up. They picked up a paddle, which was sort of power paddles on the wooden riverbank over there, and they got into a thing, and they said, right, we're ready to go. And I said, hold on. Prejudice. Where's your rucksack? Where's your food? Where's your gas canister? You told the wife, what you, he said, no. We haven't got anything. No. The river will provide. We'll get what we need on the river. There'll be water, and we'll build it. Okay. We got on the river, and it was twilight. And at that point, there were people with guns, kind of local guys, local hoods with AKs, sort of coming down the riverbank. And I said, can we go now, please? Now would be good. Really, now. And these guys got into it, and we took us off into the river. It's twilight, and we got away from the riverbank, and there was a bit of kerfuffle, a bit of a sort of stamping of feet from the guys with guns, because they wanted a chance to, hassle and do the you're a spy, give us some money thing, which is very common. Anyway, we get on the river, and it's August, late August, and I remember something that happened so well. These guys start to sing. Mm-hmm. The guy at the back, there are 4 of them. He starts to sing a refrain, and then the guys pick up the chorus, the other 3, and it's like an Oxford 8. It's the cocks, and he is chanting, and he's telling them when to put their blades in. And in Swahili, he is singing this beautiful melodic song, and the guys are picking up the chorus, and as they do, then they put their blades in, and then the timing is right, and then this bird starts lurching down. So I'm in this fantasy world. It's getting dark. I'm hearing this Swahili lullaby. The water is moving. I'm on the Congo River. I've been fantasizing about it for so long and dreaming. And then the final thing, bonus. A full moon rises. A full moon rises over the ragged heads of the palm trees, these massive giant palms on the side of the Congo. And this 2,000-meter stretch wide of river goes silver sheen. And I'm being lulled to sleep by this thing. And for me, as a travel experience, that was one of the great purest moments, because you strip away everything. And that's why going to the Congo, even today, is such a wonderfully rich experience, because you just strip away from all your normality, and you have to commit to embracing a different normality. And that was quite a moment.
You must have had many such moments, many such experiences. Were there some that you didn't include the book, and you think, what, I in hindsight, I would have loved to have included that, or
well, there was one moment, there was one thing which I kind of did write chapters for, but they ended up, as it were, on the edit suite floor, and that was I get to this town today it's called Kisangani. In history, it's been called Stanleyville. It has a great history. Stuff happens there. Basically, if you're on the Congo River and you're coming upstream from the city of Leopoldville, Kinshasa today, it's the end of the stretch. It's where you go. It's the inner station. So to use the language of Joseph Conrad, when he's coming upriver, and his character is going upriver, in his book Out of Darkness, it is the inner station. So it's pretty tough place. It's got tough history, but I was there, and and as I say, it's layered. History is always layered. So Patrice Lumumba, who was a 1960s character who would be assassinated, but he is the sort of Nelson Mandela figure of Congo when it was trying to stand on its own 2 feet. He comes from Senegal. Anyway, the point is, I was there, and the reason it's there is it's at the bottom of some cataracts, and that's as far as you can go up river. Now, Stanley, when he was on his trip, he said that he had left a carving on a cave in the cataracts above Stanley, above this place, right? He'd even drawn a picture of the cave. And I found his local bloke, and I said, "Do you know the river well enough to know this cave?" And he went, "That might be." Anyway, cut a long story short, we got on 2 motorbikes. I'm on the back of a bike. We head up the road. For me, my historical antenna are twitching because it's down this road that the relief column came in 1964 when Stanleyville, and the classic moment when nuns and missionaries were being murdered in the city, and the Belgian paratroopers were coming down. This was the road down which some journalists came, and an Australian guy was killed on that road. The road diminishes. The modern road that I'm on goes, so suddenly it's down to a ribbon of tarmac, and I notice people coming out of the bush with their machetes, and they're using the edge of the tarmac to sharpen their pangas, their machetes, not for an evil purpose, because that's your farm tool, right? That's what you need to cut through the palm and to cut through the bush and to farm with. And they were eating away at the tarmac, and this tarmac which had been carriageway with 2 lanes, was now down to a sort of a ribbon, and that was anyway. So we leave the ribbon. There's a crash on the motorbike. There's a bit of a broken hand. There's a bit of injury. Even the book I was carrying, I actually fell on the floor, and it's got covered in mud, and I've still got the mark on the book. Anyway, we get to a place where there is the cataracts open up, and there's a cave, and I'm really thrilled about this. Maybe I could find actual evidence of Stanley being here. Something that's been forgotten. I could actually run my finger on the carved stone. And to cut a long story short, I get arrested by some guy with a gun, and it's a sweaty, long afternoon, and it goes on for hours, and it's nasty, and there's threats, and there's, "You owe us $10,000, and there's that sort of thing. And that, I took it out of the book. It didn't quite fit. It was kind of like I was going back on myself. But that was a moment to remind you that, rich though the experience was, it wasn't all plain sailing. And my poor guy who came with me from Kisangani, who had fallen off the bike, he had a very rough time. But I obviously couldn't leave him, so we had to wait until it was all sorted, and $10 was paid instead of $10,000 or $8,000 or whatever it was. And I did get to the cave, and I did go inside. And sorry to say, I couldn't find the HM Stanley was here. That would have been a lovely discovery. But the truth was, no, didn't happen. A bit like in Chasing the Devil, when I go off to Liberia and I try to get to a waterfall where Graham Greene went, and I was unable to get there. And it reminds you that travel isn't all plain sailing. It doesn't always go to plan. And that makes it all the richer, doesn't it? I mean, you've got to deal with it.
I would totally agree with that. I think that sometimes it's when things don't go quite to plan. It's when you get those serendipitous moments, and something happens. And I don't know. We always say that we obviously try and make sure that things do go to plan as much as possible and wherever possible. But sometimes where they don't, a sense of humor, whatever it might be, to get you through that moment. And where it doesn't, then the guides, the people we work with on the ground, will make work very hard, very quickly, to get it back on track. So
exactly, and it would be a person who is rather unrealistic, who would be going on a journey to the Congo, to expect it all to go to plan. That's the whole point. You have to have a degree of flexibility, and because that's what the ambiance demands. That's what the local that's the reality, and to suddenly expect everything to be plain sailing. Anyway, yeah.
So you mentioned Lumumba earlier. One of my favorite books of the region, it's not a factual book, is The Catastrophist by Ronan Bennett, about Lumumba. I love that book. Beautiful book. But I wanted to ask
can't recommend that enough to your listeners.
Yeah.
That is a great example of fiction. Yeah. There was a great observation by Graham Greene. He said, we read non-fiction for facts, but for truth, we read novels. And you can lay out the facts of Lumumba in a non-fiction book, but Ronan Bennett, who's a feisty Northern Irishman, writes this incredibly beautiful book.
It's a great book. Modern day, traveling in not necessarily in the DRC, but Congo, Brazzaville, even CAR, we're very excited that you are hosting a trip for us in December 27.
What an itinerary! What an itinerary you've arranged! It's absolutely mouth-watering.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, and hopefully how a lot more will be planned, and maybe that you won't be on the back of a motorbike or in a dugout canoe, but
well, yeah, no, there's a point where I'm meeting in my trip back in the day for Blood River, I'm meeting some sort of primate which has been cooked over the exhaust pipe of a diesel engine. So and sometimes I tease guests on journeys which I'm making. Oh, maybe that's the type of food to expect. No, the itinerary is that we are going to be focusing on the smaller of the two Congos, Congo Brazzaville, which is not the vast one I've been describing, but they are absolutely juxtaposed. The two cities of Kinshasa and Brazzaville are the two capital cities in the world that lie closest together, but are separate because they're separated by river, 2.5 kilometers of river. You arrive into Congo Brazzaville and fly north, effectively going into the only accessible part of the Central African Republic. And the reason you're going there is that you're deep into the purest rainforest, and the rainforest that it got Andre Gide's juices running when he was writing 100 years ago. It got de Brazza's juices running when he was exploring 200 years ago. And as recently as 25 years ago, Michael Fay from the National Geographic, he does the Great Journey of Our Time Mega Transect, which some of your travelers might be familiar with. He starts his journey basically there, and he cuts, bam, he just goes on a line walking towards the Atlantic. We're going to the richest section of the Congo rainforest basin, Congo River Basin rainforest. All right, let me get that right. Congo River rainforest basin. It is absolutely the kind of laboratory in which equatorial animals have evolved and created their own unique systems. So we have the elephant, which everyone's familiar with in the savanna elephant, but here we have the forest elephant, and this is the elephant of mystical lore that pushes down trees and opens up the rainforest on rivers where other animals come in, especially the primates. And so it's the lowland gorilla and these extraordinary open spaces in the rainforest known as bais, which I think, I'm not exaggerating to say, Michael Fay was the first person to explore, chart, and measure, and then also to photograph, because he had an incredible photographer, I think, called Nick Nichols. They capture this Noah's Ark, Garden of Eden scenario of different animals that you only have in your imagination. Suddenly they're there in front of you. So that's in the Central African Republic.
Sorry, just on that, I think that's totally right. I love that Noah's Ark about it, because I'm lucky enough to be to Tangasanga before. And I was there when Andrea Turklo, who's Mike Fay's ex-wife, was still there as working with the elephants there. And as you so wonderfully described, it was sort of like being in a natural history documentary when you sort of walk out from the forest into the clearing, on the edge of the clearing, and you see these forest elephants kind of coming together, and the noise that they make, because of the nature of the forest, they can only live in small herds. So when they or not herds, but family groups. So when they come together, it's sort of seeing relatives, and it's just the trumpeting that goes on. It's just absolutely wonderful. So anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Well, not at all. But so I mean, in our imaginations, when one thinks of Africa, you and I might be of a similar age, but when we were growing up, there were two options, weren't there? There were sort of savannah stories of grasslands, and then there was Tarzan. I mean, let's be crude. Tarzan. It's trees and high canopy and vines and ivies and things. This is what we're talking about here, and that's why it's so unique to be able to get it. I'm so jealous that you've had the experience of getting there, but I mean, I'm sure you admit it's not easy to get there. And this trip, you were going to be flying in then taking a boat into Sangha, several days there, tracking lowland gorilla with the local community, the local guides who are Baka Pygmy community, who are the guys who helped Michael Fay when back in the day, and they are the community that is what the Bushmen are to southern Africa, the Baka are to the rainforest. They are the original indigenous community whose roots are prehistoric. They go back tens of thousands of years, and so we'll be touching on a law, an LORE, that is it defies understanding. I mean, it's all before our modern history. It's just a community that knows how to read the community, how to hear those sounds of elephants, know that's a family unit which isn't threatening. Oh, that is a threatening unit. And let's remember, the forest elephant are aggressive. They're famous. They've got different shaped heads to the savanna elephant. Their trunks wrong. Their ivory moves shaped in different directions so it doesn't snag on bush, and they are much more aggressive towards humans because of various various factors. Anyway, going into that environment, it's so difficult to get there, and yet this trip, not only are you getting there, but you're then taking a boat back out effectively, and then joining a boat that frankly I would have given my right arm to have come across when I went through the Congo, which is a genuine river passenger boat, which has been done up to a very high standard, which means 1, the engine works. 2, there's air conditioning. 3, everything is ship shape. And there we're touching on literally the African Queen. It's there's a little bit of Catherine Hepburn there. When Joseph Conrad, he writes a novel about the Congo. The reason he writes a novel is that he goes there as a sailor, because in the 1890s the Congo was a place where cutthroats and brigands and the AI generation of today would go and make money, because it was hugely lucrative, the Belgian colonial project. And so he was a sailor, this guy Joseph Conrad. He had a brilliantly complicated Polish Ukrainian name. I won't even his real name, because Joseph Conrad was a nom de plume, and I won't even have a crack at pronouncing it. But before he was a writer, he was a sailor, and he took a boat up the Congo. So there's going to be the resonances there are just extraordinary, to be able to take a boat that functions and that is comfortable, and that would allow an understanding from the locals who'll be stopping in different riverine village communities, to how the rhythms of their life, how the flow of the water, because the water changes hugely during the rainy season and then dips. We can talk about the different fish that are there. There's a famous fish, the umbenga, which is the granddaddy, or it's basically the great white shark of riverine systems. So it's this massive fish, 60, 70 kilogram samples, and it looks like something out of a sort of a Jurassic Park with peg teeth. And it takes antelope, and it's in that area. Guess what? That the umbenga is prolific. It's other known as the Goliath tigerfish. So there's a clue. It's Goliath. It's huge, and tigerfish. It's aggressive. And then from there we're going to come down a side stream to this extraordinary river, the Congo. And I remember I said it's more of a force of nature than a river. The side streams alone that flow into the Congo are longer than the Rhine. The Western Europe's largest and longest and most storied river, with castles and legends about it. And, there are 15 side streams that go into the Congo, which are longer than the Rhine. The Arawini, the Kasai, the Ubangui. Anyway, we're coming down one. And when we get to the main confluence with the river, we're actually going to cross into the DRC, into Democratic Republic of Congo, to go on an even more exciting another exciting element of the trip, which is to explore a type of primate which is incredibly special because it's closer in genetic mapping to us, to Homo sapiens, than any of the other primates, and it is unique and endemic to the DRC, and that is the bonobo. And I have never seen one, and it'd be absolutely thrilling to go with trackers to a place where the bonobos exist. They are in size between a chimpanzee and a gorilla. But they have this extraordinary characteristic. They deal with social issues using the device of sex. Yeah. So there's a lot of sex and a lot of nudge, wink, wink going on about masturbation and what have you. The point is, how interesting. I mean, to see that, to have a sense of, this is how you deal with it. It reminds me of going to Ethiopia on another trip and coming across the gelada monkeys or baboons that live in the high simians. And there they socialize in numbers that are almost beyond scientific sense. I'm not sure many of us will have read *Sapiens*, that wonderful book about 10 years ago, and it makes the Israeli author Harari makes the point that humans have a capacity to hang out with each other in large numbers. You can have 50,000 people go to a Manchester United home game without too much trouble. Open brackets. Have you been to Old Trafford ever? But the point is, other animals can't, because of a problem. Well, these geladas do in the simians. They get to 700, and guess what? They're matriarchies. If you let the women run it, the whole place works. Anyway, so bonobos, and then onto the river, and then back down to Brazzaville. The point is, the trip that you guys have put together, it's mouth-watering, because you're going to some of the most richly fascinating parts of tropical equatorial Africa, but you're stitching them together. You're stitching elements that would be it would be an incredible effort just to get to Sangha alone, or an incredible effort to get to the bonobos alone, an incredible effort to get onto a river. Believe you me, there are no other riverboats working. Going back to that story about the canoe, I mean, I went past, I've got photographs of this incredible sort of Mississippi steamer. In our imaginations, we can picture a Mississippi steamer from Huckleberry Finn, a massive thing with two great chimney stacks and a rear wheel the size of a Ferris wheel. Ginormous it was on the Congo, and it was like a whale carcass. I was looking at the bones and no flesh. It was just a rusted hulk. So the superstructure was recognizable, but all the body parts had gone, all of the piping had gone, and there was nothing. This thing hadn't moved in 50 years. So the idea of getting on a boat that does is it touches on, as I say, and there's a certain personal element. My mother traveled on the Upper Congo on a boat in 1958, and it would be rather sweet to have a connection. So it's a mouth-watering itinerary that stitches together things that each one is in and of itself an extraordinary travel experience, but to do them one after the other, wow! Delighted to be involved, and I hope to add value through storytelling and through unraveling a little bit of history.
I was about to say that in a different way. So I know that Giles, who our marketing director, I think is listening to this in the background. I know that he's very keen to join this trip as a sort of a Steps Travel member, but I might have to pull rank, not just with the itinerary alone, but to be with you and to listen to your stories and your magical storytelling. It's just, I've just so much enjoyed the last, I don't know, 40 minutes, whatever we've had together.
Well, thank you, Justin.
But I have a question for you. Is it true there's a rumor that the point of the itinerary that you're most looking forward to is when you end up, or either start or end up in Brazzaville, so you can show off your sartorial elegance with the sapeurs?
Well, I know when I'm being. Now, the sapeurs are an extraordinary social institution on both sides of the river. They're in Kinshasa and they're in Brazzaville. And we're talking about a local community who prize themselves, who prize themselves on dressing. And to say sharp is to underplay. So these guys dress in the most extraordinary way, and emerging from townships, emerging from pretty rough communities where there's there's open sewers and potholes on the road and no electricity and what have you. And out from behind a corrugated hut will appear someone who would make one of the Parisian haute couturists look like a tramp because they're dressed as. Now, I would never presume, Justin, to be able to go toe to toe, or should I say, polished Chelsea boot. What do they call them? Periwinkles or whatever those Chelsea boots. Some sort of patent leather dancing shoe. Go toe to toe with a sapeur. It would be again another experience. And Brazzaville itself, Brazzaville Beach, William Boyd's novel. We can have that as we can have that on the reading list. So
I think I could carry on talking to you for hours and hours and hours, and I think we might have to have Rumble in the Jungle #2 and sort of do a second one.
Just pause for a second. Isn't it
When We Were Kings? Great film, but yeah.
Pause for a second. Isn't it extraordinary how an undemocratic dictator used sport to cling to power? and so did Mobutu. So we have, Donald Trump uses he sets up a UFC thing, outside the White House on the lawn, just as Mobutu, who was the ultimate, the highest form of, he created the stereotype of the kleptocrat. He used boxing in 1974. And Donald Trump is doing exactly the same thing. I find that absolutely extraordinary. And as you say, Time for Kings, the movie.
When We Were Kings. When We Were Kings.
When We Were Kings, sorry. Yeah. And it's George Foreman and Ali. That's a terrific story.
So again, as I said, I've got two last questions for you. One is, so I grew up in Zambia, and I remember in the mid-70s, a lot of Zambians sort of shouting "Ale Bumbaya," which comes from what you see in the film, etc. So I've got a great love of Africa. I know that you've traveled extensively throughout Africa. You live in South Africa at the moment. What gives you, maybe it's a big question or too big a question, sort of cause for optimism about the continent as a whole? I know it's very dangerous to try and put Africa's not, it's many different countries, it's many different peoples, it's many different things, but I just think that given sometimes the negative lens with which it's viewed by the rest of the world, what can we say sort of positively about Africa as a whole, or maybe just parts of it, South Africa or other different countries?
My view, it's just the people I meet. The sparkle in the eye, the genuineness of the smile, the handshake, the stranger, and it could be that guy Mukengo, it could be an immigration official at an airport here in South Africa, or it could be someone in Mozambique on a railway here where I was a few weeks ago. It's just an extraordinary capacity to embrace life and to make it work. The recent history of Africa has been mucky. It's been turbulent and it's been negative. But the history of Africa is so colossal. You and I, we're African, right? And the science is quite clear. We all come from Africans, from Africa. And segueing back elegantly to stretch travel, what was it about those first Africans who evolved here that made them so special? They traveled. They did go beyond the horizon. We don't know. One of the great historical unknowns, and we can debate it. And was it coercion or was it choice? Did they choose to walk across, or were they being chased? Was it a virus or a climate change or whatever? But the point is, it was ex-Africa. They came from Africa to populate the world. Africa has had a rough 60, 70 years. The post-independence period has there's been some clumsiness. We can debate it with various reasons and various factors, but that is just superficial. That's just the hoodlum at the top. That's just the mafia don. What are the real people like? What are the people like who are eking out an existence in the rainforest in the Congo, or in a township outside Cape Town, 10 kilometers away on a winter's night when there's snow falling on the mountains? The spirit for life is so inspiring. I find it gives me a confidence that it will prevail. It won't be easy. There will be bumps. There will be problems. But when I look at around the world, and I look at other parts of the world these last, recent decades, Africa feels in some ways quite a solid place. And it's not Afghanistan, and it's not Iran, and it's not the Middle East, and it's not. Let me be honest. In America, when you have a Department of Justice which isn't quite sticking to the script of the founding fathers, it's pretty extraordinary. And I'm not naive, but what I would say is that exploring Africa and travel through Africa allows the outsider, to get a greater sense of that chance for the future and that spirit for looking forward.
Final question. What are you working on a book at the moment? Is there something that we can look forward to other than your hosting our trip in December 27? Is there a project you work on that you can talk about or not, or is it sort of?
Well, I had a book project which morphed into so much more than a book project, so it spat out various other things, and that is to do with essentially the fundamentally important story of how we all collude, how humans all hang out together. And it was a book on the nation state. The nation state is only 100 years, 150 years old, and yet it is absolutely the dominant model. in our time, in our lifetimes, you and I, Justin, we've seen nations come and go. We've seen Yugoslavia pull itself to pieces. We've seen East Timor created. We've seen Sudan split into two. There's nothing sacred, and the state of Israel, ongoing today. We still don't know what the borders are for the state of Israel. They are disputed, and that's a country that's been around for 60, 70 years. That is, in essence, the thing that I find utterly fascinating, and yet it's too difficult to do as a single narrative arc, this journey that we've discussed with the Congo or the other journeys I've done. And so I've split it up into various other things, and that's what I'm exploring and writing and podcasting about and what have you. But an opportunity like this particular journey, you're allowed to explore how strong a nation is. This Congo, one thing we haven't mentioned is that the Congo Brazzaville is extraordinarily different from Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, because it is much more stable. The roads are brilliant. The logistics are extraordinary. Things work. It is night and day. So that allows one to literally stand on a river and say, on this side of the river, things work, and on this side, it doesn't. Let's consider why that might be.
Why it is.
And I think that's a rather important question. And you could argue, nations are all dead. We're all going to be on our phones, and it's all going to be some sort of supranational thing, and no one's going to pay tax anymore, and yada yada. Great, but how does that collude? And I remember Theresa May, Prime Minister. She said, what did she say? She said, if you're a citizen of the world, she said, you're a citizen of nowhere. And I wonder, really, is that true? Do you have to have a flag? Do you have to have that sort of mentality? And so that's the sort of area I've been exploring these last few years. And as I say, it was conceived as a book, but I felt it got a bit too ambitious. And so I broke it up.
Well, I empathize, and I love all that you're saying in so many different ways, because I think that we're quick to point out differences between different peoples and sort of other ends of the world, but we all want for the same things, whether it be sort of stability, whether it be, I don't know, for schooling for our children, our family, and we laugh about similar things. We're not that different, and it's sometimes it's easy to talk about the difference rather than sort of that commonality and that sort of collaboration, the collusion together in different ways.
And I think politicians aren't willing to embrace the fact that we're so much more. But the truth is, humans do better when you work together.
Yeah.
Since the Second World War, what has Europe not had? It hasn't had a war in Europe for 70 years, which is an extraordinary round of time. Open brackets. Ukraine is nipping at the edges. But why is that? Well, we kind of learn to compromise and learn to get along, and we forget that at our peril. And I find it very, very interesting. Africa can teach us a lot about how communities can blend those two separate strands of coercion and cooperation. How do you carrot and stick? How do you glue something together? Because by any rights, a country like Nigeria, created by colonials, how can it? Does it exist? No way. I mean, that's insane. And yet Nigerians are passionate about Nigeria. Similarly, Congo. It shouldn't. It's so different from one side to the other, north, south, east to west. And yet, when the football team they played, of course, we joked about it. They played England the other day. That was one of the great defining national moments for the Congo, because the mighty leopards came so close and scored and had that disallowed goal.
Tim, I've absolutely loved this conversation. I think that you are just amazing to listen to. I'd like to think that I think similarly to you. I'm not as articulate as you. I'm not as lots of things as you, but I've absolutely loved the conversation. And what I would like to, I'd love to do a second one if possible at some point with you. And I would like to say, before I say thank you to you, Giles, there is no way you're coming on that trip. I'm doing it instead. So sorry, Giles. But Tim, thank you so very much indeed.
Not at all. And I look forward to perhaps having another chat on a different topic, or taking some of these topics to the next stage next time. Definitely. And the trip is very special you put together. So let's hope that I'm looking forward to that.
Great, Tim. Thank you very much indeed. Take care.
My pleasure.